All right, welcome to this explainer. I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are an ancient Egyptian who has just taken their very last breath. You are standing right at the terrifying threshold of eternity. Now, to the ancient Egyptians, death absolutely was not the end. It was really just a transition. But, and this is a massive but, it was not a guaranteed transition by any means. It was a highly perilous, step-by-step journey through this intensely treacherous underworld filled with monstrous demons, tricky gateways, and a completely terrifying final judgment. So today, we're going to walk through that exact journey together to see exactly what it took to defeat death.
Here's the roadmap for our journey. 1. The fragmented soul. 2. Preserving the vessel. 3. The journey west. 4. Equipping for eternity. And 5. The final judgment.
Starting right off with Part 1, the fragmented soul.
Okay, so the absolute most crucial thing to grasp here is that death wasn't just drifting off into a peaceful sleep. To them, it was this violent shattering of your entire existence into multiple, distinct puzzle pieces. You weren't just one spirit anymore. You were suddenly made of the Ka, which is your life force. And get this, it actually required physical food and drink to survive. Then you had the Ba, your unique personality, which was usually imagined as a human-headed bird that could literally fly around between the tomb and the living world. You also had the Ib, your heart, which they believed was the absolute center of your intelligence and morality. There was your Ren, your secret name that held all your power. And finally, your Shut, or your shadow. So, your ultimate goal on this whole journey is to reunite all these scattered spiritual fragments to form this immortal spirit of light called an Ak. But here's the catch. You absolutely cannot reunite your soul without having a physical anchor left on Earth.
Which brings us to Part 2, preserving the vessel. Since your scattered soul desperately needed a home base to return to, the living had to work fast to secure that physical anchor. And this required a visceral, incredibly scientific 70-day mummification process to just stop decomposition in its tracks. And this wasn't just some medical procedure, right? It was a deeply religious ritual. On day 1, priests would literally pull your brain out through your nostrils using a specialized iron hook. Why? Because they actually thought the brain was completely useless in the afterlife. They'd extract your internal organs through a slice in your abdomen, but, very importantly, leave your heart inside. Then, for 40 days, your body is buried in natron, which is a natural salt, to completely dry out all the moisture. Finally, you get anointed and wrapped in up to 150 meters of linen, with magical amulets tucked right in between the layers for divine protection.
Now, you might be wondering, what on earth did they do with all those organs they took out? Well, they definitely weren't just tossed in the trash. They were treated as vital components. Each one was carefully mummified and placed into 4 specific canopic jars guarded by the 4 sons of Horus. So, Imseti the human guarded your liver, Hapi the baboon protected your lungs, Duamutef the jackal looked after your stomach, and Keba-Senuef the falcon kept your intestines safe. This whole system ensured you'd have every single part of yourself ready to go for the next life.
Of course, we have to acknowledge that access to eternity wasn't exactly equal. You have the lavish, gold-filled, multi-chambered tombs of the pharaohs, think pyramids in the Valley of the Kings, contrasted with the simple, shallow sand pits of everyday commoners. But you know, what's truly fascinating about this? Burying commoners in those shallow, blistering hot desert sand pits actually preserved their bodies so perfectly just through natural drying that it likely inspired the entire artificial mummification process for the royals in the first place. Talk about ironic.
Let's move to Part 3, the journey west. So, your vessel is preserved and ready. Now it's time for the most public and dramatic phase of your entire journey, your own funeral. Just try to imagine the sheer sensory overload of this day. The procession almost always crossed the Nile River from the east, which was the land of the living where the sun rises, over to the west bank, the land of the dead where the sun sets. Your coffin gets placed on a boat, and then it's literally dragged across the desert sand on an ox-drawn sledge. And walking right ahead of you are professional female mourners, dressed in blue. They are loudly wailing, physically tearing their garments, and throwing actual dirt into their hair to show this highly visible, chaotic grief. It was just this massive, public display of sorrow, specifically meant to contrast with the super stoic, orderly priests leading the way.
Then, when you finally arrive at the tomb, the absolute most critical magic spell of the entire funeral happens. Right before you get sealed away in the darkness, a high priest, who's often wearing this imposing jackal mask of Anubis, steps up to perform the opening of the mouth ceremony. By touching your mummified face with very specific ritual tools, like an adze and a serpent-headed blade, he magically reanimates your senses. Boom! Suddenly your soul can speak, it can see the path ahead, hear the prayers being spoken, and even eat the spiritual essence of the food offerings being left for you. You're not just a preserved corpse anymore. You are back to being an active participant in your journey.
Which leads perfectly into part 4, equipping for eternity.
Okay, so now that your senses are magically restored, let's look around this mansion for eternity you've been placed inside. The ancient Egyptians honestly loved life, and they definitely did not pack light for the afterlife. They believed you needed absolutely everything you enjoyed here on Earth to keep that happiness going forever. So your tomb was stocked. We're talking huge jars of beer and wine, fresh loaves of bread, and dehydrated cuts of meat just to keep your ka fed. Wealthier folks brought their favorite furniture, their daily makeup, and even board games like Senet to pass the time. And on a practical level, you are completely covered in magical amulets, things like the Ankh for life and the Scarab for protection that were hidden directly inside your mummy bandages to act as literal spiritual armor against demons.
401. So what exactly does that number represent? Well, the Egyptian paradise was basically envisioned as a perfect farming landscape, which meant, yep, there were still chores to do. To avoid doing any actual manual labor yourself, a wealthy person might be buried with 401 of these small, mummy-shaped statues called Shopti figures. That is literally one worker for every single day of the Egyptian calendar year, plus 36 overseers just to keep them all in line. Their entire job was to magically spring to life and do all the heavy lifting for you, in paradise.
But here's the thing. To even get to that paradise, you have to navigate the Duat. And the Duat was a totally terrifying underworld full of lakes of fire, extremely strict gatekeepers, and monstrous deities. So you absolutely, without a doubt, needed this: the Book of the Dead. Tucked right into your coffin, this personalized papyrus scroll was essentially your ultimate cheat sheet. It contained over 200 magical spells, the secret passwords you'd need for those gatekeepers, and actual drawn maps to ensure your Ba could successfully navigate through all that darkness.
And now, part 5, the final judgment.
If your magic was strong enough and your map was accurate, everything you've endured up to this point leads to this exact, terrifying climax in the Hall of Two Truths. Standing right before the great god Osiris and 42 divine judges, you face your ultimate trial. You actually have to recite the negative confession, which is outlined in spell 125 of your Book of the Dead. You have to confidently look these gods dead in the eye and declare your purity, proving you lived a life of truth and cosmic order. I have not killed, I have not stolen, I have not caused pain. You are essentially acting as your own lawyer, arguing your case for eternal life.
But as we all know, words alone aren't enough. The jackal god Anubis steps forward and takes your physical heart, the Ib, which they believed held the complete, unedited record of every deed you ever did, and he places it on a great golden scale. On the opposite side of that scale, he places the pure white feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth. As that scale balances out, we really have to ask the most terrifying question in all of Egyptian mythology. What is the ultimate consequence if a lifetime of sin makes your heart heavier than that feather?
Well, if you fail, the punishment is swift, and it is absolute. Your heavy heart is instantly scooped up and devoured by Ammit, the devourer of the dead, and she is a horrifying hybrid monster with the head of a crocodile, the mane of a lion, and the heavy back half of a hippopotamus. The exact second she eats your heart, your soul suffers what they called the second death. You are just wiped from existence entirely. No afterlife, no chance at rebirth, complete and total annihilation. It was the absolute worst fear of any ancient Egyptian.
But if your heart is light and you pass the test, you become an Akh, a transfigured spirit of light, welcome to live forever in the absolute paradise of the Field of Reeds. All those fragmented soul pieces we talked about earlier finally reunite in perfect harmony. But before we completely wrap up this explainer, I want you to think about this one thing. The ancient Egyptians believed that their immortality depended incredibly heavily on their Ren, their name, being remembered and spoken out loud by the living. So, by exploring this incredible step-by-step journey together today, by reading their texts out loud and uncovering their tombs, haven't we, in a very real way, given them the exact eternal life they were searching for?